Welcome, everybody. I want to start off with kind of getting an understanding of who's here. So how many people are front-end developers? So primary job. Wow, good. How many people manage a team versus are independent or, work on a team? Okay, so a few of those. And how many people are more like managers, no hands-on code? All right. So I'm going to have to show some programming, I think. So that's good. How many people have used some of InterSystems' older technologies, Zen pages or anything like that? A lot. And one more. How many people have actually begun to implement a JavaScript framework or have one in place? Okay, just a few, like 5, 10%. Good. So this will be good for most people. And hopefully it won't be, for those of you who have already done this, it won't be too slow. So the agenda here is I'm going to talk about progressive web apps. First start off with the definition of what they are, because I think there's a lot of vagueness and different ideas floating around. And then talk about the business case for why I think everybody this should be front and center in their plans in the next year or two, and then get into the technology and talk about how you really build a progressive web app, and then hopefully have time to do a little bit of a demo. So first of all, the definition, PWA, you hear it. So what it stands for is progressive web app. Progressive is the most sort of loosey-goosey part of the term. Progressive means that your application works for every user, regardless of their browser choice or device choice, using progressive enhancement principles. And the progressive enhancement principles are where the rubber really meets the road, where things get a little vague, and a lot of variation and implementation there. But we'll talk more about that in the technology section. So web, obviously, web seems pretty simple, but it's really important because progressive web apps use web technology only. There are no native technology, no Android development needed, or iOS technology, or some of these hybrid technologies like React Native or Ionic Framework or anything like that. Web technology only, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the app part is important as well because these are really websites, web pages in a way, but they look a lot like a native app, and from the end user perspective, they work much more like a native app than like a website. So as I just said, the user experience is it is a mobile website, but it works more like a native mobile application. The app-like experience gets into things like getting a tile that you can install, quote unquote, on your device, on your mobile device, just like you'd get from a Google Play or iOS App Store. You get rid of the menu bar, the URL bar that you're used to in your web browser, and you have more of a native sort of navigation. Obviously, you have to implement that, but the idea is that you'll provide a more native navigation metaphor than you would in a website. And custom loading screen, smooth animations, all those things. So what you're trying to do with the PWA is be responsive to fit any form factor. That's like a normal website or like a normal responsive website. Fresh, transparently, always up to date. Safety is important, security. PWAs always use HTTPS. There's no option to not be encrypted. Serve via TLS to prevent snooping. No man in the middle, hopefully possible. And I'll get into more. There's a lot of really nitty-gritty details about being safe that PWAs enable you to do that. Obviously, you can do with a native app. You can do anything with a native app, but PWAs help you do that easier. And re-engageability. That's something we're not going to get into a lot here, and you'll see why in the technology section. Some of the devices, especially iOS, isn't enabling push notifications and things like that. And I bet a lot of you are here from the healthcare industry. You're not really doing retail. But for retail applications, they care a lot about being able to push notifications to people and get them re-engaged with their website or with their products. And so that's, that's something that PWA technology allows you to do, not really well supported on iOS yet. And hopefully not as important for this audience as for some others. And I mentioned installable and linkable. So these are the tenets from some of the big thinkers on PWAs. You can find some of these articles on Medium. I think in my slides I have the source where I got this. But that's the basic definition. So PWA, the acronym, some of the main tenets of the underpinning of the technology. And let's jump into the business case. So, for many of you, it's kind of, it may be a bit of a daunting task to look at changing your whole application and engaging in maybe a multi-year process of rebuilding your front-end application. But I'm here to tell you that do it now. Get into it before, because you're going to have to eventually. Some of these stats come from the retail world, where you're really afraid to lose your users. But 53% of users abandon a site if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. That's pretty important. Even if you're not selling products on the web, it's important that you have a great user experience and you don't frustrate your users. So speed, we probably know it as people using websites, that you really get annoyed if it takes a long time to load, and you might just forget about it and go on to the next thing. A lot of the healthcare apps I use as an end user annoy me a lot. So this is really important, and I'll talk about how you can get a really small site and how some of the frameworks help you do that. Native applications are pretty annoying. You often have like a 70 megabyte download. And most of that is just sort of the stuff you need to interact with the operating system. You don't have to do that when you have a PWA. So here are some success stories. I can't see it on my screen that well, so some of the biggest retailers, at least, have already moved to PWAs. West Elm, Pinterest, Tinder, Etsy have, found that PWAs are much more successful than their native apps, which is, that's a big testament to the technology. But more important, I think the most important point for us is that you don't need a specialized development staff. And there is, all the great stuff about users will like it more, and having a smaller app will engage people better, is all well and good. But I think the biggest cost factor is often huge for us. And the ability to not have to have a specialized native operating system development staff can't be emphasized enough. You can take, obviously the biggest developer community in the world is the web development community. And it's much easier to find good HTML, JavaScript people than native iOS Swift developers. Or Java is pretty big here. I'm showing a little chart of popular languages here. So Android developers are mostly using Java, even though they're using a specialized flavor of Java. Java, 45% of developers know Java. iOS Swift is down here at 8.3%. Pretty tough to find and pretty expensive people. You'd much rather be up here with the JavaScript community at 71.5% of the developer community, right? Those people are cheaper and they're easier to hire and easier to onboard. So obviously, the whole world is moving to mobile applications. I think all of us know, and most of us probably have kids and know that the new generations, even more than us, are only on their phones. They're not even using they're not even using laptops even that much anymore. Everything is going to be on the phone, and you have to be there. And do you want to be hiring native developers, or do you want to be hiring web developers? I think that's a pretty easy case. And I could almost walk away here and just send you off to start building. Is there anybody who has trouble making the case for what their front-end development strategy is going to be in the future? Or is there any doubt as to where that's going to go? Or is everybody sort of on board and ready to learn more? Okay. So let's talk about the technology. So I thought what would be most useful to do here today is go through sort of a plan you might put in place, or the skeleton of a plan you might put in place for like a year-long effort to get to a PWA point. You know, maybe it's a year, maybe it's a year and a half. But here's the way I think of it. And some of the people I know have looked at developing, you know, a team over time to do this. So the first step would be to develop a mobile-first website. So, you know, you have to get up to speed with CSS, responsive website development, degrading nicely from full-page desktop web pages down to a mobile footprint. And there's no way around that. You have to get good at that. There's no magic that's going to happen. I'm going to show you some helper code to go to PWA, but there's no way to help you figure out how to design, put your brand on a mobile device and make it fit in that form factor. So you can begin to do the homework for getting into the PWA technology by building a good website. And mobile first means you don't start with your desktop website, you know, with 1,000 pixels wide, and then sort of figure out how to make it smaller. The real point here is to start with the mobile website, because that will probably be 60–70% of your users going forward. Especially if you're targeting like a 1 or 2 year out from now, you're probably going to have, you know, most of your people are going to be using that mobile website. So think about building that first and then allowing it to expand to be a desktop website. Second stage, you could almost think of this as, I think of this as quarters. So first 3 months, work on that. Second 3 months, think about changing that mobile website into a single page application. So instead of having a series of web pages that you build that walk through your application, start thinking about it as buttons controlling the reloading of new views into a single page. And you can do that with a JavaScript framework. You can do that without a full JavaScript framework. We'll talk a little bit about that. But going from a website to a single page app may be your biggest step, your hardest step to conceptualize, if you haven't been doing that in the past. And then number 3, I was talking at lunch about this, is picking a JavaScript framework. There's I think a lot of people get stuck on this step because it's almost like a religious war. It's hard to choose between React and Angular and Vue.js and whatever's next. We were talking about Dojo earlier. And some people are advocating a jQuery only approach. But at some point, you probably have a background effort going on in the first few stages where you're coming out with that decision and you're ready to go. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you which way to go. I think it's sort of, it's almost a preference. A lot of anything you find out there on the web that's big and supported will probably be good for you, you know, based on the personalities of your development team. But you have, at some point, you want to do that. I don't think you want to develop completely from scratch because you're going to lose the benefits of a community to build on and all the tools that they create. Okay, so those are kind of the easy steps. And then, number 4, develop a boilerplate PWA. The JavaScript framework you choose will help you do this. And a few months ago when I was starting to develop this talk, I thought that would be more of a tough step and would help you inform step number 3. But more and more, every single JavaScript framework you come across has a lot of these helper applications to just give you a boilerplate. And I'll show you that later and what that entails. And then sort of step 5, 6, and 7 are really the advanced steps. which you can maybe not even get to. Actually, 5 you better get to, but 6 and 7, not, those are very advanced and sort of optional. But number 5, do smart things with caching. I'm going to talk a lot about that at the end here. Caching is really important because it goes back to the first point I made on the first slide, experience. And with performance, with getting things on the screen as fast as possible. Caching, beautiful graphics and things that never change, and only bringing in the small piece of data that changes. And even allowing people, if they're in the field or on an iPad, maybe collecting data out there, being able to work completely offline and syncing when they come back. So there's a lot of interesting stuff you can do in step 5. And dealing elegant with the offline, I just hinted at that. And then leveraging the device. That gets into things like using PWAs do and will more and more use native hardware capabilities like taking advantage of the location and the accelerometer and background processing and push notifications and things like that. Okay, and all these things will be helped by the Lighthouse test. Who has heard of Lighthouse? Google Lighthouse. Okay, you gotta, even from step 1, even before you have a PWA, when you have a website, you can use Lighthouse. Lighthouse should be your best friend throughout your web development process, and I'll show that. I can't believe nobody knows about Google Lighthouse. It's free, and it's really easy to use. Okay. So what did I want to talk about here? Oh, mobile-first websites. Okay, step 1. So now those are the 7 steps. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into each one. And mobile-first, go really fast. I bet since you're all mostly front-end developers, you know a lot about developing a mobile-first website. You don't have a lot of screen real estate. Menus often collapse to a hamburger. Giving people one idea per small screen is important because you don't have the real estate to present multiple navigation elements or big pieces of information, long reading. People don't read for a long time on mobile devices. They're walking around, they're distracted, they have kids. Mobile-first website design is part technology, it's part thinking about what somebody is doing when they're on the move and when they're on their phone. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about there. That's almost a whole class in and of itself. How to build a mobile, but that is the underpinning of everything you'll do in the future. So don't skimp on that step. If you want to build a good user interface, you have to think about not only the form factor of the mobile device, but the difference in how somebody is basically living when they're on their mobile phone. They're not sitting at their desk focused on this one task. They could be doing a bunch of stuff. So big buttons, very clear, small tasks, and let them progress that way. Single page, I'm going pretty fast here, okay. So single page app. Single page app is a step, how do I explain this very well? So, whatever JavaScript framework you use is going to get away from generating or going to a different page every time you click a button. Clicking a button instead of going to a different URL will trigger the request for new content. Content will come back, and then your application will render it, depending on what content it's dealing with. That's a big step. You could almost combine that with picking the framework. I probably should have changed this presentation a little bit because I actually probably wouldn't work on a single page app step without choosing the framework. Developing I'm going to go through, okay, so a little bit more than I said before, developing a boilerplate PWA. So you need to be running under HTTPS, first of all, if you don't already have an IT setup which supports HTTPS and certificates. You should get that in place as soon as possible. You can't, like I said earlier, you can't be running under HTTP. You have to have a secure, you have to set up your domain properly, get your certificates in place, and have all that IT infrastructure in place before you can embark on building a PWA. It just won't work without it. Other parts of a boilerplate are having a web app manifest and a service worker. So a web application, these are really the only differences between a regular website and a PWA. You have security, you have this manifest, which is just simply a JSON file, which you could write yourself, technically. And it says where some important resources are. The most simplest version of this is just tell me where the icon files are. So when I have that splash screen or when somebody wants to install it on their phone as a tile, I know what graphic to use. But it could get even more complicated and point to all the resources you want to cache, all the graphics you need to cache in your website so that the user never has to load them again. It can get more complicated. And then the service worker in a boilerplate PWA. So PWA is HTTP. It is a website. Like all communications go through HTTPS, but they don't go through the normal browser communication. They all get proxied by this little piece of JavaScript code called a service worker. And it gives you a much higher level of control over what's happening between the client and server than you got in normal web development. You can, since you have that proxy in place, you can grab it, you can cache stuff, you can do all kinds of cool stuff. But first of all, for the boilerplate, this slide is about the boilerplate. For the boilerplate, you're just putting that in place, and you're basically just proxying the traffic and letting it work like regular web traffic. Okay, once again, your site needs HTTPS. There's a great little site here. What's the URL? Does my site need a https.com? Tells you all the reasons why. Even without a PWA, you should be using HTTPS today. There's all kinds of man-in-the-middle attacks that could be happening right now. Doesn't matter if there's nothing sensitive on your site or if you don't collect information from users, you need HTTPS. Okay, so now let's get a little bit more technical to development. So here are the three most popular JavaScript frameworks, I think, that are in play right now for PWA development: Angular, React, and Vue.js. So the idea behind this slide is just to let you know it's not too intimidating to get started building that boilerplate PWA. If you choose Angular and you begin to be an Angular development shop, all you do used to be a lot harder a couple years ago, but now all you do is, well, first you install Angular, and then you have all you do is ng new my PWA, you add Angular PWA. You just add another component to enable PWA. Going back to my last slide, all that's really doing is giving you that JSON manifest file and setting up the service worker. React is the same way. Create React app. That React more is about, it puts the PWA stuff in place right away, unlike Angular where it's an optional install. So when you create a React app using Facebook's little fun skeleton or scaffolding application, Create React app, it puts in place that manifest file and the service worker and hooks up a React app to use that service worker to proxy the HTTPS traffic. Vue.js, also a couple years ago, it wasn't so easy to do this, but now it's very easy. All you do is you use this Vue.js scaffolding code to create a PWA. And I'm going to use React today, so I'll show you in action how that works. So let's go into a live demo. So then we test with Lighthouse. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to come back to this because it'll make more sense once I show some code. So now I'm going to, first of all, let me start with, who wants to give me a website? Who's bold enough to tell me give me their URL? Anybody? Should I actually do InterSystems? Okay, so in Google Chrome, which I'm using right now, so Lighthouse is a website you can go to test any URL. PWAs are, they have URLs, so you can test PWAs, but you can also test any website. Google Chrome has an extension, a Lighthouse extension, that you can install and make this even easier. I've installed that, so I'm going to click on this button, and I'm going to generate a report. Okay, so we don't come out so what was that, like 3 seconds? I got some amazing information thanks to the developers at Google. So we scored yellows and everything. So performance, a 73, accessibility, best practices, SEO. And then you can go down and dig into what all these statistics mean. So first, contentful paint. This is important because that's the first time your users can actually interact with your website. 1.8 seconds, not bad. As I said before, if you go over 3 seconds, users get really upset. So that was first, but our first meaningful paint was over 3 seconds, 3.8, probably why we got a yellow score. Speed index, bad. Time to interactive, 4.8, that's very bad. We want that to be under 3. So a lot of good information here. Also tells you, gives you some great recommendations on what to change. So remove unused CSS. Somehow it figures out that almost a full second is spent loading some stuff it didn't think we need, doesn't think we need. Maybe, maybe not, who knows. Some other interesting things, render blocking resources, some great diagnostics here. Actually, in the 70s isn't a horrible score. A lot of websites do a lot worse. Accessibility, more and more important nowadays, especially if you're doing federal government work. Not even important, it's mandatory. Having accessible names on buttons. This is great stuff to have automatically generated for you. So you can begin to do Lighthouse reports immediately and take that information and build that into your future development. Best practices are more optional things, but you can actually get a lot of good training from reading through this report. Doesn't use passive listeners to improve scrolling performance. I don't know what that means, but could work on that. Uses front-end JavaScript libraries with known security vulnerabilities. That's got to be a bad thing. So once more, upgrade our jQuery version. SEO, that would be good. Okay, so that's Lighthouse report on a website. Now let me go in and build a PWA. So as I said, React lets you do it very easily. I have it here, but let me try to do it completely from scratch in this demo. What do I have, 20 minutes? Sure. Okay. So what did I say the command was? I'm going to go back and cheat. Oh. Okay. npx create React app. So I've installed npm and npx, and if you know npm, which I bet most of you do here, npm is a way to automate pulling in Node.js libraries and keeping them up to date. And create React app is a scaffolding helper script built on top of npm to bring in all the stuff you need to do PWAs in the way Facebook's React framework wants you to do that. Which is very, very simple. If you had to do this yourself, it would be very difficult. You'd have to configure Babel, which is a library which helps you manage, I think it helps you manage all the differences in versions between web browsers and write one version of code so that you don't have to worry about supporting multiple versions of web browsers back years and years. Webpack, which is a library that helps you package up all this JavaScript and CSS and graphics and all that into a nice JavaScript bundle that you just distribute to the web, minimize it, all those good things. And then we bring in all these libraries to do the actual React stuff. So since this is taking a while, I might do it like a cooking show and go back to the one I've already created. So once that's done, you have this little thing here. So I'll list all the node modules I brought in here. Huge number of things. Oh, sure. So 185 megabytes of libraries for this thing. But when you minify it, it'll be a lot better. Remember, the goal is to get whatever you do to have the richest development environment possible, but deliver something that can load in under 3 seconds. Our source directory is much smaller. Ooh. So there we only have 40K of stuff. So I'm going to fire this up. Oh. So Create React App gives you everything you need to actually run something. I think it's already running in my browser, so I have it in Chrome. Oh. Maybe it didn't quite completely start. Am I blocking? Oh, it's just going slow. Starting development server, finally. Okay, so now we have this little app, Create React App.script. Installed all the source, everything we need, this tiny little application which shows us this page. I'll show you the code there. So what that gave us was, as I said, there were all these node modules that were installed, just a little bit of source. The top of the source is an index.js file. And you'll see the two important parts here. Well, it imports CSS file, imports app from .app, that's more JavaScript, and imports service worker. Remember, I mentioned that service worker was really important. The service worker code is that advanced stage. You're going to have somebody really get to understand, get to know pretty well. It looks complicated here, but this is the most basic. So once the window loads, we're going to proxy some. I won't get into this right now. We're going to proxy all web requests. And there's a whole API for what you can do with the service worker. So that's all index.js does. And everybody I know who uses React uses this Create React App to start with. So a lot of people's code will look like this, although it doesn't have to. Oh, sorry, forgot one thing. And the most important thing index.js does is load, it renders the app. An app is app.js. And the way React works is that it creates a virtual DOM, which, if you know HTML, DOM corresponds to an element in HTML. And React is a series of child DOMs, or child nodes, which each know how to render themselves. So you can nicely separate all the crazy stuff that's going on with the data-driven website. And you can imagine, since this was created by Facebook, there's a lot of stuff going on in different parts of their pages. And so naturally, they came up with this framework where each little piece of the page, each little graphic element of the page could control what information it was getting and could render itself, because you have huge development teams at Facebook and they want to, a clean separation of concerns. In our case, this is very simple. All we have is one class app, and it's just doing this one thing. It's showing you this image. And I won't get into anything about React, but what you do is you return a mixture. It's called JSX, but it's a mixture of HTML and a little bit of TypeScript, I would call it. You can write in TypeScript or JavaScript, but that's a topic for another discussion. But let's run Lighthouse. That's what I want to do this, so we could run Lighthouse on this. Okay, so not too bad. Not great for such a simple application. You'd expect hundreds across the board. So we've got performance, low, accessibility, best practices, SEO. Kind of meaningless because we haven't done very much, so those better be pretty high. But we still have a pretty long first meaningful paint, 3.6 seconds. Why is that? Well, it turns out the reason why is that when you're in development mode, you're not actually minifying any of your code. You're not optimizing your bundle, so to speak. So as it says here, it gives you a hint when you ran this thing, which is note the development build is not optimized. To create a production build, use yarn build. So I've already done that too. So I've already done this, so it'll probably be really fast. The first time I did this, it took maybe 20 seconds. Is it going to be faster this time? Maybe not. So if you run, so the important thing here is when you're doing development, you don't want to optimize your code because then it's harder to debug and inspect and go in and see where your problems were. So when you create an optimized build, you lose some of that ability to inspect your code, but you get a much smaller bundle and you get more meaningful results from Lighthouse. I think I already have it, so I could just go. And the Create React app is nice enough to run the production build on a different port. So here it says yarn global add serve. I've already done that. I'm just going to serve it now. Serve -s, serve my build version. It'll serve it on port 5000. It's ready to go. Okay, so it's the same app. I'll click on Lighthouse, generate report. And we'll get much better results. Yes, 100 on performance. So we were able to shrink that thing by more than half by optimizing our build. So we get a first meaningful paint in 1.4 seconds. Same accessibility best practices in SEO because we didn't change any code. All we did was we got some performance benefits from minimizing. But the main thing about Lighthouse, I mean, it's a great tool. When you get into this, you're going to use it every day. And you might actually integrate Lighthouse into your continuous integration process. And I think they're API hooks. Lighthouse isn't just a website. It's, you can actually hook it. I'm pretty sure they're API hooks. So if you just Google Lighthouse, you'll find this rich, comprehensive website, which is much more useful than this talk on how to do this well. And remember, it's not just for PWAs, it's for websites in general. But it will not only allow you to run these tests, it will teach you how to do things well. Okay. So let me jump back into presentation mode. So one thing Lighthouse will not do is teach you how to implement service workers well. So I'm going to finish up with a little bit of talk of service workers. So as I mentioned, as you get into more advanced PWA work, you're going to work on the progressive enhancement, work on caching, and work on fine-tuning that user experience. So this is what a service worker does. You get you have a page under scope. Number one, after registering a service worker, which you get out of the box, each time a client in that scope requests a resource from any place on the network, service workers enters into the picture. So you make a request for a web resource from your code, service worker grabs it, and then the request goes out to the internet. When you first do this in a boilerplate, it doesn't do anything in here. All it does is pass on that request. But there's all these hooks within the service worker for doing different things. So here's the URL for this example, but I thought this was a great picture of what's happening. So you have your app over here, service worker enters in. There are different strategies for how you're going to implement caching. Are you going to do a try the network first and fall back to cache? Are you going to check the cache first before going over the network? There's different methodologies you can use, but you're going to hit the service worker. Usually people are going to check the cache for cached information. You might want to do a check-in here. Is this request for something that really should default to the network first because it's a request for data, or is it a request for an asset like an icon or something where it's probably better to go to cache? So you can do all that logic in here and then return whatever you need back to the application. And you'll spend a lot, as you get more advanced, you'll spend a lot of time on the service worker and figuring out what you want to do there. I think for healthcare applications, this is a really important step, which can really improve the way things work, because you can have people walking around hospitals, you can have people off-site and recording information, and so this can really make or break an application doing this well. As the PWA market or community gets more advanced, nowadays we're starting to find toolkits you can use to implement service workers very well. So, a year or two ago, you had to do all your service worker code by hand. Now you have things like Workbox, which gives you a lot more helper code to implement this stuff. Your pre-caching, runtime caching, routing requests, and syncing. So check out Workbox. And the final step about taking advantage of what's in the hardware on a device, I thought I'd end with just a little slide of what you can do today and what you might be able to do in the future on different devices. So across the board, in iOS, Android, you can, as of December 2018, you have offline support, geolocation, which means you can take advantage of the GPS in the device, sensors, the accelerometer, knowing whether the device is tilted straight up or down, or jumping up and down. Speech, you can actually make the device speak the text that's in your application. You can get access to camera and audio output. iOS does not give you access to Bluetooth yet, or background execution, which I ran into when I was building an application which was for safety, which was going out querying the open crime data source. The idea was that as you walk around, it would tell you if you were in a dangerous area, and that needed background code execution to work right, and I had it on Android but not on iOS. So that's still something we're, in the developer community, we're hoping to get Apple to implement. Now, as I mentioned earlier, push notifications still are not in iOS. But you have a wealth of hardware you can get access to. You can imagine that camera is probably pretty important if you're out there doing a lot of work with patients. And that's it. So I hope that was a nice little tour through PWA content or concepts. Are there any questions? I think we have a couple minutes for questions. Thanks.